In this presentation, we'll discuss how bank feeds might fit into our accounting system. Get ready, because it's time to engage with Sage Business Cloud Accounting. Here we are in our Get Great Guitars summary page. We're going to jump over to a flowchart just to discuss how the bank feeds may fit into our process. Now note, when we're thinking about Sage Accounting, we can use a full accrual accounting system. It has all the functionality even to put in the inventory and whatnot into the full accrual accounting system. So the question with the Sage software isn't whether or not the software can handle a different type of accrual accounting versus a cash accounting system. It can. It's the question of how do we want to run our accounting systems for the ease of usage and the best information that we can provide for ourselves. To do that, let's consider a flowchart. Now this flowchart is actually on QuickBooks Desktop, but we're just considering the flowchart so we can break things down into a flowchart and think about the flows in sections. And as we do so, think about, well, how are we going to set up a system if we have the bank feeds involved within the system? So when we think about the full accounting cycle, the full accounting system, it's nice to break that out into different kind of flows. For example, we could have the flow of the vendors or the accounts payable or the purchases flow, then the customers flow or the accounts receivable or the revenue flow, and then the employee flow. Once we break the information down to those flows, we can think about the processes that are happening in those flows for each of our accounting systems. As we do that, I would consider then, are we on more of a cash basis or an accrual basis with regards to that particular flow? And then once we know that, we can think about how the bank feeds might fit into that particular flow. So just realize when you're thinking about whether you're on a cash basis or an accrual basis, doesn't necessarily mean you're on one or the other per se, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're on one or the other for every flow process throughout your system. If you are a publicly traded company, you're typically required to be using an accrual system for generally accepted accounting principles. But even then, some of your flow processes, you may still basically be paying things off in a cash basically format. So you want to consider what's the flow process going to, and whether you're on a cash basis or an accrual basis. It's quite possible, especially for small businesses to be on, or mid-sized businesses to be on an accrual basis, for example, on the customer side of things, and on the vendor side of things to be possibly more on a cash basis system. For example, let's take a look at the customers or sales or revenue section. And let's first consider the easier scenario, us being on a cash basis. What would it look like if we're in the type of industry where we can be more of on a cash basis? And it will typically be driven by the type of industry we are in, whether or not we need an accrual system or not. A type of industry that may be really well suited for a cash type of system that can basically be dependent on the bank feeds would be if you're doing some kind of e-services. So if you like have books that are making royalties or something from Amazon or something like that, or you do even affiliate type of commission type things where you're getting paid by different online institutions that pay those, then that would be more of a cash basis type of system. If you're getting money from like a YouTube or AdSense or something like that, then once you get the money, you know where it came from, and you're probably recording revenue when you get paid at that point in time. So in that case, you'd be more on a cash basis system, typically with regards to revenue, because you're probably not recording any revenue until you actually get paid. There's no inventory involved. There's no billing. You're not, sending out the bill and waiting for the payment to happen. So that's a pretty basic system in terms of a cash basis system. And then the question is, well, how do bank feeds fit into that? Note, if you were on a traditional system, what you would do then is you would record the revenue on your side. You'd still record it separately from the banks. And then you would reconcile it to the bank to check and see that it cleared the bank. That gives you that double check. So even still, you'd be on a cash basis system, but you'd be checking your books that you entered against the bank's books. Now, if you want to use the bank feeds and kind of skip that step, it loses some reliability because you don't have two sets of books, but it's a little bit easier to just say, all right, I'm not going to record it on my side at all. I'm just going to use the bank feeds to feed into my accounting system. And then once they feed into my accounting system, I'm going to record the revenue based on the bank, therefore be reliant on the bank. And that kind of system will work quite well for that type of service business where you're just basically waiting for the revenue to go through. Now, what about a type of business where you have to bill the client? You have to invoice the client, like a landscaper or a lawyer or a bookkeeper or something. You got to people do work, they charge their time to it, and you got to count the time or something like that, and then bill out the client with the use of an invoice, and they're going to pay you later Well, in that case, now you've entered an accrual component into the system. This invoice increases accounts receivable and it increases sales at that point. So it has nothing to do with cash. So somehow then you're going to say, I need to invoice people, increase in the receivable, match that out to the feeds, the bank feeds that'll happen later, which are basically going to record the deposit that we're going to receive. So now you got to think about how you're going to tie that out. Are you going to enter the invoice and then wait till the deposit clears the bank and tie it out to the deposit? Or are you going to record the invoice, receive the payment, deposit into the bank on our side of the books, and then just simply match it out to the fact that the deposit cleared the bank? So you got to think about how that would happen. Or you might be in an industry where you have sales in the organization, like you have a shop. People bring things up to the shop, you do services, and you can imagine the cash register recording. So you record sales at the point in time that work is done, like a restaurant or something like that. At that point, then, when you make the sale, the cash would be going up at the point of sale, and revenue would happen at that point, and then you would need to deposit it into the bank. Now, the problem with this with bank feeds is that when you make the sales, you're going to have to group them together. You can have cash possibly in that scenario that you're going to have to then go to the bank and deposit into the bank. So typically you would take all the sales for the day and then you would want to record them into the bank as one lump deposit so that it shows up on the bank in the same format as it shows up on your books. And typically you would want some kind of comparison. So the question there is, when you use the bank feeds, if you wait for your deposit to clear the bank, then you may not have that kind of double check that you would have when you make the sales receipts. Because usually when you make the sales receipts, it would increase cash. So in that case, you got to think about, well, how am I going to be matching up my sales receipt to the deposit that's going to go into the bank with the bank feed? So we'll discuss some of these items as we go through. Then if you go on to the vendor side of things, like the payable side of things, it's quite possible for small companies to pay basically on a cash basis. Like they're going to pay the utility bill, the phone bill, and whatnot. Maybe they have electronic transfers or electronic payments for all those, and you just pay it when it comes due. You pay it, and if that were the case, then the bank feeds would work great, because if you have electronic payments going through the bank, they're going to show up on your bank feeds, and they'll show who you're paying and everything, and you could set it up at that point in time, and that might work quite well, whether or not you're basically on an accrual basis invoicing on the customer side of things or not, right? You could be a kind of more of a cash side of things on the vendor side. However, if you're in a situation where you need to enter the bills and you need to track the bills, now you've entered an accrual type of thing to it again. Because the bills, when you enter the bill, it increases the payable amounts you owe, and the other side goes to an expense if it was an expense that you purchased. So then you're gonna have to have the same thing. If you enter the bill and then you pay the bill, well, if you record the payment of the bill, then you're gonna have to match out the payment in some way to the item that clears the bank in the bank feeds. Or you're gonna think about, well, can I enter the bill and then wait till the bank feed clears the payment of the bill and then match out the payment that comes through the bank feed to the bill, right? So those are some things with that. And then you've got inventory. Inventory is another kind of accrual type of thing, because when you pay for the inventory, it goes on the books as an asset as opposed to expensing it at the point of payment. So when you get into the tracking of inventory, you're throwing kind of an accrual type of component into the system, where you have the question of, are you going to be tracking the inventory in the system? Now, note that the Sage software does have the ability to track the inventory units on it. It's just then a question of whether you want to do that or not. Do you want to put the inventory on the books, which is an accrual kind of component to the system, and then actually track the physical units of the inventory in your accounting system? If you do that, then of course that adds kind of a level of complexity, and we'll talk a little bit more on that as we go through the bank feeds as well. And then of course we've got the employees. If you don't have employees, then again, that's going to be a lot easier over here on the employee side of things. If you do have employees, if you run it through the accounting system and record all the detail within the accounting system, you've kind of introduced an accrual type of system, because part of processing payroll is to take out some of the wages from the employees and hold on to that in a payable account, which you're going to pay later. And that's kind of an accrual type of thing, right? And so if you process the payroll through the system, you're going to have to deal with that more complexity. You can also think about payroll as a third party. You can process payroll through a third party like a Paychex or an ADP. Let them give all, track all that detail, and then basically put your information on more of a cash basis if you still choose, and then depend on possibly a CPA or accountant at the end of the year tax preparer to do any kind of adjusting entries that are needed periodically, end of month or end of year, for the reporting at those point in times. So those are just some kind of thought processes. It doesn't, whatever kind of system accounting software you're using, and again, Sage can accommodate an accrual system in there, but your question still is what's best for you. You have the functionality, and what's the best for you in these type of different sections, and then once that's the case, how would those automatic bank feeds fit into the system? Do I want to be reliant on the bank feeds, or do I want the bank feeds to be that kind of double check, which they have traditionally been? There's pros and cons to each kind of method, and the method could change as businesses change and grow and evolve. So we're going to continue with this, jumping back over to the Sage in future presentations. That's it for now. Let's get out of here.